People that after the talk, I don't know what it is. I think it's like after on our system, come back if you have a ticket, and if we have Hangouts, if you want to stay, and if we have more room, we'll let more people in. It's what I read. When you do a lot of this, you just find entertainment wherever you got to do it. So I actually
Thank you for coming back a bit early. Just to give you a sense of where we're at in the program, one of the things that we had talked about earlier when Kik was outlining various drivers and business cases for the subject matter we've been talking about, clearly mobile, as everybody has mentioned, is one of the principal forcing functions for change in Internet identity and standards. And that change is also being felt within the OpenID Foundation. The number of individual members as well as corporate members from that community is increasing. As a matter of fact, our colleagues from Verizon Business are going to be joining the OpenID Foundation at the board level, as will colleagues from Orange. So that begins to give us, add to the team of rivals, if you will, that represents this ecosystem and is seen on the OpenID board, where we have an increasingly strong presence from Deutsche Telekom, now Orange and Verizon, beginning to kind of push the tempo of innovation and standards development from that perspective. So I think that's really good news, and that's an obvious reflection of the changes and demands in the marketplace. Part of what the way that we've constructed the day was that you heard earlier in the presentation on OpenID Connect and Microsoft's, I think, first or semi-first official kind of a preview of SIPs, an enterprise perspective, a deployment perspective for these standards. The middle of the sandwich is some of the work that Patrick Harding described from Ping Identity. Patrick Saylor will join us shortly, talking about pulling the other major driver in the marketplace of social login and integrating that value. And also kind of in that last middle layer of connective tissue between enterprise and social. Teaser, I call her the geek behind Lady Gaga, will also be joining Patrick on the panel. So Vidya will share Jan Rain's perspective. Jan Rain, like Giga, again, push the tempo of development, trying to be mindful of how social login factors into these standards as well. And also, as the Microsoft folks did give you a preview of their SIPs offering, we'll hear a bit about yet another standard joining the queue in the OpenID Foundation. So Patrick, if you want to come up and give us a start, Vidya, if you don't mind sitting here so you can keep your colleague honest. We're going to spend the next hour talking about the social dimension. Then again, as promised, giving you the Google perspective. We'll have a break, and then we're going to force you to choose between an even deeper discussion on some of the technology aspects, or an opportunity to talk about this notion of trust frameworks that most folks have described. And hopefully we'll have some of our colleagues from the UK government join that discussion so that we can remove the targets from their backs and share it equally among the community. So Patrick, please on.
Hi everyone, my name is Patrick Salyer. I'm the CEO of Giga. And I'm actually going to bring the conversation to more of a business perspective. What I want to talk about is why are marketers in online businesses, and specifically customer and consumer online businesses, choosing to implement social login. So I want to talk about how are they prioritizing it? Because ultimately a project to implement social login is a choice, right? It has to come before other projects. It's costly. It's going to take the development time, the product time. And so I want to talk about what are the factors that are influencing that. And I'll talk about a little bit how they're perceiving it to be better for users, how they're seeing that it can drive more engagement on their site, which translates into Google revenue, and how they're viewing it as an opportunity to get more customer insights. So before I jump into that, I want to spend 1 minute just give you a little bit more background on the company and the perspective we're coming from, because I think it provides a bit of a unique background that allows us to speak about this subject. So just to give you a sense, real quick, Gigia's mission is to socialize every website and every application on the web. And we're currently pretty scaled at this point. We touch 1 billion unique users. We work with over 500 enterprises. So in the US, we work with 43 of the Comscore 100 properties. We work with 8 of the top 10 media companies in the US. So it's likely that you've actually interacted with us somewhere where you logged in socially. You just didn't know it. And just to give you a sense of the breadth of what we offer, there's really a front-end piece and a back-end piece to our offering. But we provide, we call it social infrastructure. So everything a site needs to become social. And a cornerstone of that is what we're calling social identity management. But essentially, allowing users to log in with a social identity and providing the back-end system that allows businesses to harness and understand that data and take advantage of that data. We also provide a front-end piece, and we call these social plugins and social gamification tools. These are tools that help after you get that user logged into a website. It brings in things like the social graph, the interest graph, and creates very personalized, engaging experiences for users, kind of a Facebook-like experience. And real quick, just to give you a subset of some of the customers we work with, I'm going to get right into the discussion next. But again, over 500 customers. You'll see a lot of familiar names up here. We're talking to literally hundreds of businesses every single month. So we're having a lot of these discussions with marketers and really trying to make that business case for implementing social login.
There's people on the VC.
Oh, sure. I like to move when I talk, so kind of continue here. All right, so again, we're talking about social login. Why are businesses going to implement social login? I'm going to break up the discussion into 4 parts. I'll talk about how businesses are really starting to understand that this is better for users, that users want social login. And a lot of people in this room are going to be familiar with this case. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it. I'm going to go into how social login is really ends up being the driver, the gateway for increasing engagement on site by bringing in that interest graph and that social graph. I'll talk about how deep customer insights are really being drawn out when a user logs in with a social identity. And ultimately, I'm going to talk about the ROI we're seeing, the real business impact on our customers. Let's jump right into it. Let's talk about the case of this better for users. This is really outdated data that I'm sure a lot of you have seen. But we have a lot of accounts, right? We have a lot of passwords. It is a huge pain point for users to have to create another account on another site. And this just becomes increasingly difficult in a mobile world. I hate creating an account in a mobile application or an iPad application. So again, people are starting to recognize that this is a real pain point. And users are becoming more comfortable with the process of this authorization flow. And this is a question that I get from C-levels, from VPs in every large organization. Are users comfortable with clicking this authorization, this allowance, and going through this process? And our data shows us that they're very, very comfortable with this process. We see click-through rates in the high 80% when users are going through this flow. And I think it's important. One of the things I share with actually the businesses that I talk to and sort of get them understanding that users are very familiar with this case is there's a whole subset of users that have grown up with Facebook apps. And if you think about the flow for adding a Facebook application, it's the same process as connecting through Facebook Connect or Twitter Connect. So this is the Farmville application, obviously Zynga. It's a terrible time suck for society. I think we might all agree. But over 100 million people use this thing. And so they've gone through this authorization flow. So when they go to a new website and they see login through Facebook or login through Twitter or LinkedIn or whatever that might be, users are very comfortable with this flow at this point. Now, this is some data eMarketer put out. We've done a similar survey, Janrain has as well, that users are choosing social login in increasingly higher rates. When we first started this 2 years ago, the data was not this high, right? Typically on a site, you might see 10 to 15% of users choose to log in through a social identity. What we're seeing, I think you'll find Janrain saying the same thing, is that percentage is much, much higher. It's about a third or even more. Some sites are seeing 60 to 70% of users choosing to log in with a social identity. We think this number will just keep climbing as users become more familiar and more comfortable with the process. We're also seeing that users prefer choice, right? We're not just seeing that Facebook is the dominant login provider on the web. Our personal data shows us that across our 500 clients, Facebook is about 61% of the login, and then you do see a breakdown from there. Google being about 12%, Yahoo 15%. This is internationally as well, so this is across all of our clients. And you'll see this actually skew quite a bit depending on what type of site it is. So obviously, maybe not obviously, this is kind of interesting finding. On news sites, actually Twitter among our clients is the #1 login choice. Media sites, obviously Facebook heavy. B2B sites, intuitively, the LinkedIn, for example, in the U.S. is the #1 provider. And I think it's important, and we convince businesses that it is important to enable choice, not because users are actually, the data shows that they're choosing different providers, but we do believe that this idea of personas will continue on the web. So this is my attempt at a joke here, being that we're in the UK. So you guys might know the actor Sacha Baron Cohen, and I think he, like myself, has different personas on the web, right? If I take myself, my Facebook identity is really my real friends, and it's almost becoming actually more extended than my real friends today. I'd like to kind of narrow it down a little bit. Twitter is those that I'd like to know, and hope they would like to know me. And LinkedIn is my real professional contacts. And Google, for the most part, is really a kind of a private identity for me today. And so I think that idea of personas is almost kind of, for users, is becoming a proxy for managing what sites they want to see what data and what users they want to interact with on which sites. And if you take a news site, I think it is particularly relevant. So if I go, for example, New York Times, they're not a client of ours. I think they only allow people to log into Facebook, but I think it's a shame because anytime I'm on the New York Times, I could be wanting to share something, for example, or see what my contacts are reading from my friends, professional contacts, or again, just those people that I'd like to know. Okay, so we talked about how social login is better for users, and businesses are really starting to see that. Those items, by the way, I just shared aren't, I think a lot of the people in this room kind of could nod their head to those items, but for the businesses we talk to, they're not all terribly obvious and things that the businesses knew about. So a lot of what I think our company is doing, as well as Janrain, is doing education. It's becoming less important as time goes on. I mean, we are seeing a shift. This year is a lot different than last year, for instance. But there is education, I think, and it really has to go through the stack. I mean, you have to educate developers in a different way. You have to educate product, which is a different way than marketing. And then the C level is just a whole another level of education. And so one of the things that, just kind of going on a tangent here, one of the things that's really resonating for us is I personally talk to a lot of C levels, is this idea of when every C level knows they have to integrate social. And they're actually kind of going through decisions in their mind, especially brands, for instance. If you're Pepsi, do you give up your domain and just go on Facebook or on Twitter? Or do you want to keep your domain and still have a web presence? And one of the things that I think the C-levels really like about keeping a domain but bringing social into the site experience via social login is they still get a lot of control. They maintain the user experience. They actually build a relationship with the user in a way that they're not going to do if they give up their website or give up their application. So I think that's one reason we're going to see this continued adoption of social login and these different social tools on sites. So let's go to this next part of the discussion. What I'm going to talk about is how after that user has logged in with a social identity, how can the site leverage that login to create an experience that actually benefits the business? And I'll break it up into two parts. The first part I'm going to talk about is how they can leverage the social login to bring in the interest graph, bring in the social graph, and create a more relevant, more engaging site experience. And I think this is extremely important today because social networks have meant that users' expectations, in my opinion, I'm talking about consumer-facing users, how they use the web, right? They expect this kind of Facebook-like experience. They expect their social graph, their interest graph. They don't want to operate on the web alone. I'm generalizing here, of course. But I think this is widely what we see and what we believe. And so what we're talking about is social login is the access point for creating that kind of that Facebook-like experience wherever users go on the web. I'll use a few examples. These actually aren't gig clients, though I just want to give you a sense of what's happening on the web. So if you take TripAdvisor, which is a travel planning site in the US. I think they may be international as well. So travel planning, typically you go to a site and you're trying to figure out, I'm going to London, what hotel do I stay in? And I have to trust the judgment of people that I know nothing about. And travel is something that I think everyone kind of has their own particular style, their own likes. Like one hotel, I like boutique hotels versus chains. And if TripAdvisor, this is what they do, can actually leverage social to give me a very customized experience. When I log into TripAdvisor and I'm trying to figure out where to go to London, I can actually see which of my Facebook friends have recently stayed in a hotel in London, which hotel they stayed in. We, of course, want this to be permission-based if they reviewed a hotel. And then you can take it a step further. TripAdvisor can actually recommend hotels based on other people that have similar profiles as me and can just do this inherently. And you can see, I mean, it's just intuitive how this would be so much of a better experience for users. And how people typically, how I might ask for a hotel before I can do this on TripAdvisor, figure out which hotel I want to stay in, is I'd either ask my friends in the offline world, or I'd ask my colleagues at work, because they're going to be something like me. But I can tell you that everyone that goes to TripAdvisor isn't necessarily like me. So this sort of social filter, I think, is just intuitively better for the web. And as a result, TripAdvisor will see increased time spent, increased visitorship. So the next one is social graph integration or interaction with your friends. And this one is just intuitive to me because we're, as a group of people, just society in general, we like to do things with other people. It just makes sense, right? We like to shop with other people. We like to go to the movies with other people. We like to watch sporting events with other people. We like to dialogue about the news with other people. And so when a user logs in through social identity, obviously we can bring in that social graph and create an experience where you're not alone. And I think Spotify has done an incredible job of this. This is a music listening app that probably many of you use. It's pretty remarkable. I can log in and see any of one of my friends, whether they're on an iPhone or an iPad, if they've opted into this, or online. I can see what they're listening to right now and listen to music with them. I can also see what albums they've recently added. And if you look at Spotify's growth over the past year, it's just been hockey stick. It went from nothing a year and a half ago to being, I think, close to the largest music listening app on the market. And other music listening apps are really, their traffic has remained pretty constant, pretty flat. So I believe this same sort of thing that Spotify did to music, you're going to see happen in other industries as well. Now finally, what I'm calling the social sharing pipeline. So logging in through a social identity creates this pipe between the website and the social network, which makes sharing seamless. And you've seen, for example, Facebook come out with what they call frictionless sharing, which is just allowing these people that I'm calling hypersocial people, people that will share absolutely anything, to very easily and quickly share what they're doing on your site, share what they're reading, share what they're watching, share what they're buying. And this is important for businesses because every time that user shares, we're finding that 2 to 5 users will come out of Facebook to the website. So that's a lot, right? This is an incredible traffic driver for the business. So social login can establish this gateway, and what I'm showing here is The Independent, a newspaper here in the UK where they've implemented this Facebook tool where I can share any article I go to or whatever I comment on, that's just going to seamlessly go to my Facebook newsfeed and be seen by my friends. So I'm not going to go into, is this a good user experience or not? I think you can kind of go down that route pretty heavily. I do think that businesses need to very carefully maintain controls and transparency so users know what's happening and when things are being shared. But you can't deny the facts. Many businesses today are actually getting more traffic from social than from search. Like, that's remarkable. I'll show you a slide just here later in the deck. But that is such a shift for businesses, and you wouldn't have seen that a year ago. So these businesses that have traditionally spent a lot of resources on optimizing for SEO are now trying to think, how do you optimize for social? And it starts with social login, right? So if you can make this argument that there's a real benefit to getting that user to log in socially, they're going to drive more traffic to the site. And all of a sudden, the business owner really perks up. So Huffington Post to me is just a great case study to look at a site that integrates social login, creates this deep social engagement, social interaction, and has benefited dramatically. So Huffington Post, as you guys may know, is a news site, predominantly in the U.S. It was started by Ariana Huffington about 4 years ago. Nothing more than a blog. But the approach that she took to the business is integrated social from the ground up. So you log in with Facebook, log in through Twitter. Once you log in, you can see what your Twitter friends are reading, your Facebook friends. You can seamlessly share anything into Facebook, Twitter. If you look at where they're getting their referral traffic, it is nearly all from social. And go to Compete and go to Quantcast and look at their traffic patterns compared to other news sites in the U.S. It has just been on a steady path over the last 2.5 years. And it's more interesting if you see who they're passing in terms of traffic. About 6 months ago, they passed the Washington Post, which is obviously a news institution. So, I just think it represents how there's just a shift online where businesses are taking this very seriously and they're creating more engagement, more interaction. They're seeing real business benefits, which again, going back to one of the drivers for implementing social login. Okay, so we talked about how social login can be a gateway for increasing engagement, time spent, conversions. But let's talk about kind of another piece to the value of implementing social login, which is deeper customer insights. Really gaining a deeper understanding of who users are that visit your site. So Facebook accomplished something that I think the web has been trying to do at scale for a long time, which is users have voluntarily put one of their identities, whether it's their real identity or not, we can talk about, but put a lot of identity information about themselves on Facebook, right? Interests, likes, activities, where they're from, where they work. They voluntarily did that because they got value out of it. They like using the site, they like interacting with friends. And Facebook did something that could provide value to businesses when they opened up Facebook Connect, which allowed businesses to implement social login. And this is a tremendous opportunity for an online business to get access to who a user really is, right? If you think about it, it like moves us back into like the 20s or the 30s when you used to own the corner store. And the owner of the corner store that would sell things to you knew everything about you. They grew up with you. They knew who you were. They knew like what party you were at last weekend. They knew who your parents were. And social login kind of moves back to that world where a business can actually have that level of understanding about you. So they can better market to you. They can better do email marketing. They can better recommend content to you. Now, of course, we need to think about the privacy implications of this, and we need to make sure it's done in a permission-based way. We need to make sure that users understand that. I think a lot of those discussions will kind of play out. I do think it's worth mentioning here what the alternative is to businesses understanding users this way. So businesses are already trying to get a lot of this data, even when users don't log in through social identities. They're just using third-party, non-permission-based ways to get at that data. They're taking your email address and they're using these services, and we all know there's a lot of them out there. And that data could be true or untrue, but the user doesn't know what's happening. And the one thing to say about social login, businesses really are acknowledging this, is that user is giving permission. I don't know if I showed it. And this is, of course, the permission side that we all know about for that business to access this data and leverage this data. Now, one of the things that we're really helping businesses do is understand the terms and conditions around how this data gets passed and making sure they're handling the data the right way. And again, those things are going to play out. But again, big opportunity for businesses. And what we're seeing is that after that user logs in through a social identity, businesses are actually starting to think about how can this impact traditional marketing? How can they pull this data and change the way that they send emails and make the emails much more highly targeted, or the way they recommend content? And as a side note, businesses aren't prepared to do a lot of these things, so that's why I think there's opportunities for companies like Gigya today. So we actually are providing new types of infrastructure to help businesses harness this data. So we actually have a cloud-based MongoDB database that's designed to pull and analyze social data. And what we're finding is that existing databases that businesses have really aren't meant to handle all of this data. They tend to be relational databases that are used to handling 4 or 5 pieces of data. When the marketing person goes to IT and says, I want to implement social login, and I want to start really harnessing this data, understanding it, and leveraging it in a permission-based way, the IT person generally either has to make dramatic changes to the way their database works, or this is going to actually have them outsource to companies like Gigya to do that. So that's kind of as a side note, one of the reasons why we're providing this new kind of infrastructure for this social web. And in terms of how businesses are starting to think about leveraging this data, I mean, it's all the traditional marketing that they're already doing. So I mentioned recommendation engines, building it into CRM, data management platforms, etc. Okay, so we talked about why are businesses implementing social login to drive that site engagement, have deeper customer insights. I'll share just a subset, just a little bit of what we're seeing in terms of the impact on the businesses that we're integrating with. So first of all, across all of our clients, we've been able to measure for users that log in through a social identity, are those users spending more time on site or viewing more pages? We're just simply asking that question. And remember, these sites that we're implementing social login with, they're not just logging in, right? We're actually leveraging that information to create a more engaging, interactive site experience. So what we're finding is that when users log in with a social identity, on average, they'll spend 12 minutes across our customer sites. And when users log in with a standard identity, right, we're just creating a username and password, it's only 8 minutes. So it's a pretty dramatic increase. We're also finding that users will view on average 10 pages when they log into a social identity versus half that number for a standard login. So we are seeing an impact there across our businesses. Now, just to kind of call out a couple of our customers, so we work with Verizon through a site called Verizon Insider, which is essentially a community they built to try to get people to spend more time on the brand. They can figure out, there's a lot of local events that you can check out and comment. They've integrated what we call game mechanics, which are just trying to incentivize people to participate as part of the community. And they're actually seeing that users that log on to social identity spend 30% more time on site, or viewing 15% more pages. So again, just one simple case study, but pretty good results. I'll go through a couple of others quickly here in the interest of time. TCReal, part of the IDG family, integrated social login, and they actually see a 40% increase in new registrations, which is pretty dramatic for them. I mean, it's how they're essentially measuring success based on their ability to sell ad buys as well as drive page views. So this is a pretty dramatic business-changing result. Giant Nerd is an outdoor retailer that's actually integrated social from the ground up. So the reason why we use them is because they did what Spotify did, but they're doing it for e-commerce, rethought the way e-commerce should work. And they're actually finding that users that log in through a social identity are 5 times more likely to make a purchase. Now they're making product and content recommendations based on your social graph and interest graph. They've done a really good job changing the way that shopping works based on this access to social identities. And finally, this is the slide that I referenced earlier, and I think this is a pretty dramatic slide, how social is really overtaking search. And these are for various businesses that I think have done a good job really optimizing for social. And you can see that the referral traffic, these are referral traffic numbers, the blue bar being referral traffic from Facebook and Twitter, the green bar being referral traffic from Google, kind of traditional SEO traffic. It's pretty dramatic that social is more than search for many of these websites. So again, this is a This is really kind of a game changer when you show this in front of a C-level and executive. Thanks everyone for your time. This is my contact information, and I'll be sticking around later if you guys would like to discuss more. Appreciate it.
Good afternoon. How's everybody feeling after lunch? I'm Vidisha Kumar. I'm the product team for Gen9. We are in the social user management business as well. Today, I'm going to talk about 3 specific things with you guys. Online engagement, user intelligence, and customer relationships. Let's talk about these 3 things today. So, not Sasha Baron Cohen, but meet Anne. She's got multiple personas as well. So she uses LinkedIn for professional networks, she uses Google and Facebook to communicate with friends and family, and she uses Twitter to share short bursts of messages with her social graph for friends or followers. But Anne has a problem. She is a very honest, upright citizen, law-abiding, but she loves to lie on registration forms. So how many of us here lie on registration forms? All right. Well, you're not alone. 88% of the people we surveyed in the United States admit to lying on registration forms. This is a study we undertook as Gen9 with a company called Blue Research. They've been working with the likes of Microsoft and Intel, and they do a lot of consumer research, and we publish this once a year around the retail holiday season. And so, 88% have lied on the registration forms just to get by. And we'll be undertaking a similar study in the UK to see if, if UK citizens are more honest than Americans. So, Anne now uses social login. As Patrick alluded to earlier, that the general consumer trend has been that people are starting to use social logins to log in. So our survey results indicate that about 77% of people prefer to log in with social rather than fill out traditional registration. So the number is on the rise. When we surveyed the same group of people, or a similar group of people last year, way back in 2010 December, it was about 66%. So the number is on the rise, which is quite positive in terms of consumer adoption of technology. So what's the benefit to Anne? She registers really quickly, it's frictionless, her data is pre-populated from the social network, and she's off to the races, she's ready. And she can actually now start to engage very deeply with the brand. She can comment, she can participate in chats, make purchases, check out, earn badges, read, so on and so forth. So I don't need to read the entire slide, you get the picture, right? She's engaged, she started to engage with it. But as an organization, as a brand, you can get to know Anne a little bit better. She has revealed a lot of information about herself in her Facebook profile, in her Google profile, through Twitter. So she's revealing a lot of information about herself. You can access, as a brand, as an organization, you now have access to this data. Permission-based, as Patrick talked about a few seconds ago, you're not skulking around and you're not actually harvesting that data. You're actually asking Anne for permission, and she lawfully, legally approves you access to that data to personalize her experience on the website. You get to build a 360-degree view on Anne. How do you do that? You take her declared data from her social network. As an organization, you probably have had CRM systems that date back to 10, 15 years, since the mid-90s that you put into place in your organization. Why throw that data away? Why not combine that with this new additional layer of data called social data and build this new set of information around Anne, build a 360 on her? You've got clickstream data, you've got behavior data, you've got purchase history on Anne. Just build that all together and build that 360 on her. Anne has multiple personas, like Sasha Baron Cohen, and you can build intelligence around that. You've got her Facebook profile, you've got details on Google. It depends on which identity she uses to engage with your brand, but let's say she uses one or two more, and you can build that intelligence on her, you can build that 360. You can build a relationship with them. Just like generating customer service has done, you can take the social data that you get back from the social network. She's declared some interest on her social networking profile. Why not use that to serve her some relevant, pertinent content on the website? And that's what you get to do with this data. Now, social has this ability to give you one extra dimension of data that traditional registration does not. It's called the social graph. You don't ask a user to fill out information about their 50 friends, their birthdays, and their interests. With social, with just a click of a single button, with approval from the user, you can pull their entire social graph and seemingly, benign information, not too much information about their friends and social graph. You can pull that information in, and you could build rich experiences like Sears has done here, which is, hey, here's your friend's birthday. Would you like to buy her or him a gift based on their interests? It's very simple. It goes a long way in being able to build a relationship with your customer. Now let's look at building brand loyalty. This is a European customer of ours, Shop With Your Friends. They're leveraging social graph to actually allow the user to participate in co-shopping events. So you actually pull your social graph, you shop with your friends. That's the name of the brand, that's the name of the site, and that's what they do, which is allowing the user to pick products off the website, share back to their social graph, bring them back to the website, and shop with your friends. So really quickly, I don't want to belabor the point, we talked about online engagement, using social in order to build a more tighter online engagement with your user, being able to gather the intelligence on the user through social login, and building deep, longer-lasting customer relationships by providing deeper, more pertinent content, relevant content, and experiences on the website. I want to take a brief moment, since this is an OpenID conference, and pause a little bit and look at the historical perspective of where we have come from, where we started and where we are as an industry, as a software industry. I don't know if this slide is very readable, but thinking back or looking back to 1978, I think most of us were around or probably younger, but the first computerized bulletin board system, and look how far we have come from that, from 1978 to being able to generate and harness tremendous amounts of user-generated content. Now we're in a world where we're talking about big data and being able to process a lot of that data that's being generated. Fast forward to the walled gardens of AOL. I used to be a former AOL employee, so know all that too well. And the walled garden approaches, the internet on training wheels. We've come beyond that. The Facebooks and Twitters of the world, the iPads, the iPhone, touch devices, and finally now being able to pin your interest using Pinterest as a social network. Well, and all of that is thanks to Open Standards Day. This is an OpenID conference. I want to give a little shout out to all the open standards that have made it possible to pass data between websites in a secure manner, permission the user, get approval from the user to access their data, OpenID, OAuth, and earlier today you all heard about OpenID Connect. All these standards are making this possible. And I also want to talk about an emerging standard in a little bit. But before that, gentlemen and the one lady in the room, I give you the web of 2012. And I'm not talking about the naked person on the site. I'm talking about the complexity. This is how complex websites are today. It is no longer a very simple experience. Websites are incredibly complex. They have a lot of applications on our website. And these rich experiences are needed by brands today. They're needed by brands today because websites are targeting audiences with a short attention span, a high desire for gratification. How many of us like to wait for more than 20 seconds for a web page to load? 15 years ago, we were more tolerant about the banner ads that were on the website. We were okay with limited screen size, but expectations are higher. Because expectations are higher, brands have to work a lot more harder to keep their online consumers engaged. I have a point to this. Here you're looking at 3 disparate applications on a web page. And these three disparate applications on a web page all need to have a sense of who the user is in order to achieve an experience, in order to provide the user with an optimal user experience. So I'd like to introduce an emerging standard that we've been working with the OpenID Foundation on, known as backlink. What is backlink? Simply put, the definition is it enables exchange of user data between various applications on a web page. To those who are SOA experts here and people who have been working in enterprise identity management and web services, it's almost like a website-side messaging bus. Every application on a page is aware. It listens on a single channel. The identity application broadcasts the user identity, and every other application listens to the identity, picks up the identity, and logs the user in. So I want to show you how that works. So here we are. Eric signs in. Over backlink, the message is communicated. Every widget on the page listens to that message and ultimately logs the user in. Look how far we have come from monolithic walled garden identities to decentralized identities on the web to being able to broadcast the user's identity on a secure messaging channel on a page to be able to pick that up and broadcast it to multiple applications. And before I jump into the previous slide, why is this important? This is important because brands today are no longer able to settle on single experiences. They have to work with the best in class out there. They have to assemble these experiences rather quickly in order to keep their audiences captivated. So they can no longer go with a one-size-fits-all, one-stop shop. They have to go with building out disparate applications, picking the best partner that they can go with in order to make a certain experience possible. A little bit about Gen so I've talked about the market. We've been defining and leading the social identity space since about 2005, working with a lot of brains in this room, the Googles, the PayPal, Facebook, Yahoo, Twitter, and MySpace at the time. We're deployed on 360, our social login product is deployed on 365,000 websites worldwide. And we do solve user management challenges, such as being able to fetch that profile data, put that in a database, make it available to marketers so they can target their users. Some of the leading brands that we work with, it's just a small sampling of the brands that we've worked with, and we're very proud and honored to be working with a lot of European and UK-based brands here. We have over 200 large brand customers who are using our user management platform today. So where are we going from here as an industry? The journey is by no means over. It just continues. It is about building interoperable components on the web. It is about being innovative. It is about assembling best-in-class experiences from best-in-class vendors and technologies out there. There is no monolithic system that you can deploy on a website. And I talked a lot about website-side components. Let me take a pause and also talk about the data. There is no single owner of profile data. Facebook may have a lot of information on users. It is about assembling the best attributes on a user from providers who can give you the best attributes. If you're a brand or an organization that's looking to complete a transaction online and you want to get the shipping address, well, who better than maybe the Postal Service to give you that verified attribute? Maybe you want a phone number on a user. Well, who better than somebody who's in the telecommunications field or somebody who's a carrier to provide that attribute to you? So we are in a very diverse, very decentralized environment today, and it is very important for us to collectively, as a technology standards body and as a technology vendors and organizations, to work on these standards that make it possible for large brands and large organizations to put together best-in-class applications, best-in-class data on their users, and continue to evolve the ecosystem. Lastly, I'd like to leave you with a slide on Janrain. So we provide services for social login, social sharing, customer acquisition, social profile data, loyalty rewards, game mechanics, the gamut of solutions for large brands to be able to successfully acquire their customers, engage their customers, and be able to drive loyalty and monetization programs. And for those service providers out here in this room, we offer an identity provider service, which enables large service providers to become identity providers themselves and to accept and verify attributes. So here's my contact information. I'll be around and looking forward to talking to you.
Thank you, Vijay.
Patrick, if you want to join us, why do I think there's going to be some questions? Or problem solved for the UK government, we simply log into Facebook and receive our wealth of benefits. Thank you very much. Problem solved, sir.
Which is more speaking. A question for Vidya. Does your survey find out how many people claim to live their social network page?
That is a very good question. Actually, we have undertaken a lot of data analysis of our current customers, and I went in believing that there's going to be a lot of lie in the user's profile, simply by comparing the user's declared location information in their social networking profile and correlating that against a web analytics like Google Analytics. We found an extremely high percentage of correlation between what the brand or the organization that I work with said was their location, and their location as they saw it on Google Analytics, and what we saw in the social profile data. I could tell you that people do lie a little bit about the age that they've passed to the site, but in general, when you look at the social networking profile in and of themselves, there isn't a high degree of lie. So I was proven wrong. I went in as a skeptic and came back a believer.
Sir, the man with the target on your back.
Thank you. Speaking as a man who's a member of the UK citizenry, rather than my professional, the question is not UK government policy.
Why is that important, I wonder?
I believe you guys work in dying industry. Yes, you're on the hockey curve, yes, you're growing, but you're trading on complete ignorance, and so are your customers. And very soon, international privacy concerns, international regulators and so on, will stop the release wholesale of sensitive data attributes to be mined and other things that you're selling. And we will be replaced with proportionate release programs, attributes verified for the purpose in hand, for the transaction in hand, in the context only of what the customer sees, rather than this covert back channel exchange. Comment.
That was usually quite specific.
So there isn't a covert back channel exchange. It is a very transparent, upfront, permission-based data exchange. I do agree with you
It's
that...
not transparent if the customer doesn't understand, as indeed my children don't.
Mm-hmm.
They have so many Facebook apps, their data goes all over, and I keep explaining why they're being targeted. I've never personally, as an aware professional, accepted a Facebook app because I cannot accept the permissions that other customers just say yes to.
You could always say no. They've gotten a lot more selective about selectively saying no and still being able to log in. So we were on a panel a couple of weeks back talking about the same thing with the U.S. government. And
this is a traveling road show, by the way.
and there, I mean, we had an intense debate. Would you rather put something like this in a privacy policy that nobody ever reads, although there were two people in the room who did say they read the privacy. So, hats off to them. But it's a lot more transparent and upfront in front of the user. And the user management platform that we provide also has the notion of a public and private profile page that the user can then go to and select or deselect what they have shared with the brand. I agree with you that there needs to be a lot that goes in terms of educating the audience. When you poll 16 to some odd 20, up north of 25, 28-year-olds, they don't care as much about privacy as 30 to 50-year-olds do. Yeah, and so it's subjective. It's
But they do care about trust.
They do care about trust. They do care about trust.
The downside of this model is the lack of trust, which is an inherent deterioration of code. So if I don't trust your inferences of brand or offers or referrals or coupons or usage data, I'm not going to permit my identity to be used unilaterally across a
Absolutely, and to that point, we do work with large brands to practice this concept of progressive permissioning, which is don't throw up a page, even if you're transparent, don't throw up a page in front of the user and ask them for 50 pieces of data about themselves, because that is going to freak them out, that is going to spook them, and they will say no. So rather than ask them for all this information, only ask for what you think you need and what you think the consumer believes that they need to believe that you need that information. So just ask for email address and be very transparent about why you're asking for that email address. When they go to share, ask for their permission to post to their wall. Offline access, give them a reason why you're asking for offline access. So there's transparency, there's best practices we advise brands on, and there's a whole combination of that. I'm not quite on board with the fact that we're in a dying industry. I think we will die if we're not careful, but we're not quite there yet.
Other questions, comments? Great. Yeah, one last
I was
one.
going to say that if I was talking to one of my US colleagues the other day, now, there's a suggestion, a warm suggestion, that anyone entering US politics now, really, as a young person, to say they have something to hide or not, they can't control the answer to that question anymore. That's now gone. And until adequate controls, and I'm really echoing my colleague here on the left said, and still until the pendulum swings back the other way, such that those who are on the one hand competent, on the other hand responsible when it comes to decision making, then the current situation may well continue. So there's a much more strategic question here about culture, the effect on democracy, and so on. So I'm trying to go in with my colleague on the left, but we've already got a time bomb here, and I'm wondering how we're going to get the genie back in the bottle.
One last question.
It's more of a comment, I guess, than sort of feedback. You're federating username and password. At some point, in order to kind of jump the node into having this be taken seriously by enterprises for actual real applications, how do you propose that you federate something like two-factor authentication? Is that in the roadmap for either of your platforms?
Mm-hmm. So I'll be honest, I don't come from the technical side. I think I can tell you how we make decisions is based on customer demand and industry demand. So certainly if that need comes about from the customer we're working with, we'll see. I couldn't speak about it.
The answer is yes. The social login component in and of itself doesn't, because once you log in, you get thrown on the registration form. And our full-service user management platform can support the notion of a multi-factor authentication at that point. And we could also do that for secure transactions. So, let a user in to the front door for a regular commenting or a, writing a review kind of scenario. But then when you go to checkout and when you have to conduct a sensitive transaction, we can throw in an extra password, or we can throw in a post-read authentication at that point. So several of those do exist, even as you're federating the user.
Also, the last session today is going to be doing a bit more of a deeper dive on that. I think we have one more question over here.
It's just a comment, really. I mean, it's very interesting that 88% of people rely on the registration form, whether that number is high, low, or it doesn't really matter. I think the question which would be interesting to answer is why they do it. Because making yourselves younger, fine, that fits a demographic. Actually, I don't trust where this information is going. The carrier is probably the most weighted. That's probably the reason why they do. Therefore, it becomes self-fulfilling.
That is definitely one very valid point. The other valid point is the mundaneness of having to enter so much information. There are websites out there that actually have pre-made registrations for filling out registration forms of large corporations' white paper downloads. They've already created valid credentials, and very legally operated websites. They have rules on, how do you, let's say you want to go to a large Fortune 100 company that sells databases and download their white paper. They've got credentials published for those kinds of scenarios. So there is the I don't know where this information is going and how it's going to be used, which is a trust issue, and that social is not going to solve that. But then there's also this piece of why do they need so many pieces of information about me, and why is it so mundane to have to enter that?
Thank you very much. By way of segue, this whole notion of branding, trust, and reliability any of us who've been engaged with the Cabinet Office work here in the UK, think about it in that context as well, is what kind of customer engagement, what kind of user experience we have in a government context, in a social context, in an enterprise context. So the next presentation by Eric Sachs of Google really begins to look at customer engagement and user experience, driving for more reliable registration information as the beginning of a work stream. So Eric?
Great. Thank you very much. So I'm going to start by talking about why did Google, Yahoo, and a number of other companies in the room get involved with the OpenID Foundation a couple of years ago, almost about 4 years ago. Back then, those of us who ran login systems had to deal with one common type of abuse, which was hackers who would create fake webmail accounts so they could send out their Viagra spam. They're very good at doing it. They're the ones who forced us out those ugly CAPTCHAs to our sign-up forms, and we started answering those, and they got better and better at it. Unfortunately, over time, what they came to realize was they could monetize their activities better, not by creating fake accounts and sending out small amounts of spam, but by taking over real users' accounts. And then the most common one nowadays is send messages to all your friends saying, help, help, I'm stuck in Madrid, I've been mugged, I lost all my money, the American consulate gave me a new passport, but I know we haven't talked in years, would you wire me $100 to help me pay off some bills? That's working extremely well for these guys. Unfortunately, that now means a lot of people have their account hijacked. So how many people here have ever received such a I'm stuck in Madrid message? All right, and now how many people have either had or know of a friend's email account or Facebook account that's been stolen? An even larger group. So now these guys have gotten even more sophisticated about this. They've realized that as they started hijacking more and more accounts, what it forced big email providers and social networks to do is to get better at detecting a hijacked account and return it to people. And so I've worked at Google and leading our identity team for about 8.5 years. And in certain ways, people like to feel like, in the press at least, Google does everything about them. But I'm in the funny position where I'm trying to help someone recover, say, their Gmail account with all the photos of their kid, and it got stolen by some hacker in Tanzania. The person comes to me, the only way they can identify themselves to me is with an email address and a password, and the password's been stolen. Now, they want to get their account back. How am I going to help them return their account? I do not know their address. I don't actually have a picture of their house. People might like to believe that. It's very hard, it's very expensive to return these accounts to people, especially without having false positives. That's the position Google's in, Yahoo, Hotmail, AOL, Facebook, etc. And as we looked around and started to realize, what was the source of these accounts being hijacked? Was it phishing? Was it malware? What did it turn out to be? The largest source, it turned out, and Verizon was just repeating this in a recent summary report they put out, that it turned out that password reuse is the biggest problem that we're seeing. Where the hackers realized, they don't need to break through the barriers of Microsoft's, Hotmail security or Facebook security or Google security. Those are too high barriers to get through. Instead, they'll break into Sony PlayStation or Gawker or many other websites who don't even realize yet they're compromised. Most cases, they're able to break into the back end, get a password list, usually decrypted pretty darn easily. Even if not, they just take over the front end page where people are typing their passwords and just start collecting and harvesting the passwords as they come in. They then take those and use that same email address and password or some small variants of it to log into the user's webmail account or social network account. And from them, boom, they take over the account, they start spending these false messages to your friends. They're golden. They're making lots of money. They're making so much money now that this is a big business, one where they can do very targeted attacks against people. For example, take the alumni list of Harvard College, target all those people specifically to try to get their accounts, because their friends are probably high net worth individuals who offer a lot of money. They've even gotten to the level of sophistication where they now recognize that when, say, Google or Facebook helps a user recover access to their account, usually what the user will find is all the data in their account is gone. And the reason being, the hacker doesn't want a user to recover their account and then mail all their friends saying, hey, if you got one of those stuck in Madrid messages, ignore it, I'm not really there. So they delete the user's entire mail, address book, etc., so that they can't do that. So sometimes, we will help someone recover their account. All their data is gone. And now we're on to the stage of, okay, how do you help people recover their data and not have false positives in that space? So this sort of escalating war has gotten worse and worse over the years. We were talking about trust for a while here. Well, these webmail services are generally provided for free. Our users need to trust our brand to provide them, and we're having a hard time protecting our users for the data that they've chosen to put with us, even if it's basic email, leaving off social networks for a moment. So when we came to realize that it was primarily from password, hacking dictionary attacks against these low-end sites, we as a number of companies came to the conclusion that we need to convince most companies to get out of the password management business. We can talk a lot about higher other value propositions up in the chain, like social login, which honestly are helping convince many websites to get out of the password management business. But just from a very basic perspective of, hey, if a user is giving their password to a low-end website, they probably don't realize that they're basically giving the keys to the kingdom to all their data on the entire internet. Well, that's a privacy breach, right? So over the last few years, as members of the OpenID Foundation, we've been going out to websites and asking, what would it take to convince you to get out of the password management business and to offer users at least the option of using one or more identity providers? And so we've been working our way through the list of, what do they need, finding a balance between privacy, security, reliability, having some, big websites who sort of, showed, that this could be done and worked well. And one of the significant ones that we've been left with, and I want to talk about with you today, is around user experience. In particular, when we go and talk with websites who already have a login system, they have millions of people who've been logging in with an email address and password. The idea of changing the look and feel of that to something else reasonably scares a lot of websites that they're going to get a lot of help desk calls. Most, these websites report that lost passwords are the number one source of customer complaints and help desk calls. The idea of changing their login system is very scary to them. And in fact, of the websites who have experimented with this, they have in fact found that surge of help desk calls. And unless the website is getting real big boosts of the type Jan May talked about from other value propositions, it's difficult to offset that. So we've spent a lot of time as a community trying to find a user experience approach that we believe would help websites avoid those types of help desk calls, while also trying to solve some of the other problems that have been talked about today with more choice for identity providers, simplifying the experience for people. And we're going to talk about one today that we refer to the account chooser. But if those of you who are members who've sort of followed the identity community for years, you're going to see a lot of visual aspects here, which are just, to be honest, copies of things like the Windows login page or info card or things from the SAML community. We've just tried to take the pieces that work the best, figured out the parts that didn't, and then mix them together. So what I wanted to start by doing was showing you what is like the best login flow you can have today on a website that offers the choice of social login. And as an example, I'm going to use from the Ireland login page. Hopefully it doesn't look too different from the Yahoo US. So this is Yahoo's login page. And you notice that they've added the option for users to log in with an existing account at two of their biggest competitors, which may seem like a slightly strange thing, but they've seen the same value proposition that Patrick and Vidya talked about increased sign-in, sign-up rates, etc. And so the theory is great that in the best case, user simply goes here, clicks the Facebook button or Google button, and if they already have an account at Yahoo, they're just logged in, nothing more to it. Unfortunately, what a lot of websites find who have existing users who've been logging in for a while is that all of a sudden that existing user comes here and there are these new options and you just start to freak out. Like, oh my God, look at all the choices here. It's like, wait, did I use that button or that button? Or am I supposed to log in with a password? Or wait, I want to create an account. Can I do it down here or do I have to go here first? What do I do? Or do I just give up and click the help, I don't know what to do button? Or it gets worse. How many of you have young kids? All right, so I've got an 8-year-old, a 6-year-old, and a 1-year-old. My 8-year-old, I think, knows all my passwords by just watching me type in the keyboard, and is bugging me for her own computer. I haven't given it to her yet, but it is not uncommon for me to walk away from the computer, come back, and find that she is logged into her Google account, and yes, she actually has a Facebook account, and I'm honestly using that to attempt to teach her about things, and underline and bold attempt. And so it is not uncommon for me to go to a site, click the Facebook button, and I'm logged in Yahoo, and I start doing stuff, and I don't realize I'm logged in as her. And some embarrassing things can happen to both of us in these cases. Right? So the idea of clicking a brand button to identify yourself, it may be an improvement about leaking your passwords everywhere, but we'd like to be doing better than that. So what I'm going to show you, and I'm going to do live demos today, and if we lose internet connectivity, I'll switch over to screenshots, is a service that the OpenID Foundation is making available called the Account Chooser, which is designed to be an improvement on this flow. And so let's take an extreme case, and I'm going to make sort of consumer and enterprise use cases here, because we wanted to solve both at the same time. Let's say I'm an employee of a company, and I hear that they now have an online 401k management service. I want to go check it out. Actually, I'll kill these for a minute. And I've got the URL of the site, from my company, and so I want to type it into my browser, and it's one of these SaaS services that supports a lot of companies. So I'm going there expecting to encounter one of these painful sign up, sign in type flows. But when I type in the URL and wait for my internet connectivity to load, fingers crossed, not like that, I'll switch to sign up the screenshot. But it did work great. So the user sees a page like this one, where, and I'll explain the details in a minute, the user sees a list of accounts that are most frequently used on that computer, as well as the marketing and descriptive information about the site that they're about to visit. And the user simply here would choose the account that they want to use at that site. Now you notice down at the bottom is an entry for my daughter who keeps on getting it onto my computer. So, I want to go into my corporate, 401k site. I'm not going to click, her picture. I'm going to click, my work picture, google.com. Click it, and then in a moment, after my identity provider verified that in fact I own that email address, I'll be logged into the site. And this is sort of good. The nice slow internet connectivity, you can actually see what's going on. Usually it's sort of fast, just looks like screenshots. Anyway, so I'm waiting for that one. Okay, great, that one's done. Let me go and imagine another website. Let's say, I as a user on the same computer, maybe I'm at work on my lunch break, I hear about some new online social gaming website. Sounds cool, I want to check it out. I mentioned I have a 1-year-old, so it's the Crib Wars site. You can go there and compete with other parents who have young kids keeping them up all the night. So I'm sure some of you all remember that. So I go to this site and I encounter the same type of experience. There's a list of accounts there that I most frequently use on this computer, descriptive information about the site that I might want to visit, and here I have to go and pick the account I want to use. And so I would use my personal account, my eric.sachs@gmail.com account. However, you notice it says the word Facebook down here. This website, deal with the devil, or some of us might describe it, has chosen to only support Facebook and a small number of other identity providers. And so it's telling me, yes, I have the opportunity to use my Facebook account here if I want to, though initially I'm just releasing this information. I say, okay, I'm willing to do that, click it, and in a moment the site creates an account for me and goes ahead and logs me in. So this is the type of experience we'd like to get users to the point they go to a site, simply see the pictures of the accounts they most frequently use, click one that they want to use, and that's it, nothing more for them. But let's talk about how we would actually get there. And so as an example, I'm going to go to another sort of enterprise SaaS service, in this case like an expense management application that my company uses. And imagine it's one that I've used for years as an employee, and it's one of these companies we couldn't even get SAML enabled, so I had to set up a password there for my corporate account. And so every time I go there and I want to log in, I got to hunt around for the sign-in link, which is up here, and then of course I see the traditional ugly form, type my email address, type my password, and get in. Well, what the OpenID Foundation is providing now is as a first layer is a small bit of JavaScript that this website can put on their sign-in page and on their sign-up page. And if they do that, and I come back and visit this exact same site, just type in their main URL, the thing that I would see would instead be this, where I see that same list of accounts I frequently use on the computer, marketing information describing the website that I'm visiting, and I can choose the account I want to use. In this case, again, I'll choose my corporate account. Now, when I do, I don't get nirvana. I'm still asked for my password. But actually, some helpful things immediately happen here. The first is, I didn't have to decide whether to sign in or sign up, or more importantly, remember whether I needed to sign on or sign up, which, especially on consumer websites or even enterprise SaaS offerings, users don't always remember which. In Google's case, we find about 1/3 of the people who go through our sign-up page, our sign-up flow, already had an account at Google, just didn't really remember or connected the dots. It puts them in a really ugly experience. We basically have to tell them you're an idiot to get them back into the site. It's not really a good way to start things off. So here the website took, that the user wanted to use this efactorguru.com address as a hint, went into its account registration database, said, oh, well, this is user's registered, so I'll ask them for a password. But if the user wasn't registered, it could have put them in a sign-up flow and asked them for other information. In the browser, actually, the other thing to notice is it pre-filled the email address, so I didn't have to type that. And if I had chosen to save the password in my browser, say Firefox or Chrome, that would have automatically been filled as well. Now, think about this on a mobile device in particular. I just went to this page, simply clicked the picture, and all that I'm left with doing is potentially having to type my password before even having that automatically filled. That is a significant improvement about going to a site, hunting and picking for sign in, expanding and trying to click on the little link, hoping I went to the right place, then having to type my email address manually. We've already gotten much further into the flow. And as has been talked about a few times here, websites are getting very interested in trying to improve their mobile sign-up experience. So this is a very small, set of technical work that a website can do to layer an account chooser on top of their existing login system without changing anything else. But let's say that website did decide that they were ready to get out of the password management business, and they decided to call up one of the vendors in the OpenID Foundation, like those who have presented here. In that case, when the user came back to the site and came back to the homepage, one of the key things noted, their visual experience at this point is the exact same as it was a minute ago. They have no idea at this point of whether the site is going to ask them for a password or not. And to be honest, of course, they'd rather than not. And so when I, as a user, come here, I click the account that I want to use, and now what's going to happen is actually my identity provider is going to verify my identity instead of being asked for a password, and I'll be logged in. So, I was talking before about the reasonable concerns a lot of websites have about help desk calls for changing their login and sign-in flow. Here what we've shown is if you add an account chooser to your site first as a flow before doing anything with federated login, the user experience switch to do something with federated login later is actually very simple for users. In fact, it's so simple they do the exact same thing. They go to a site, see a list of pictures, they click one, sometimes ask for a password, and sometimes they're not. And so over time, we're hoping to convince, as I said, the majority of websites deploy an account chooser first as a stepping stone, and then call up one of these companies to help you get out of the password business. By the way, let me throw in a little pitch here. As a company who runs an identity provider, we generally do not suggest trying to build your own relying party stack. You will get it wrong. There is a reason that these vendors specialize in this stuff, Genring, Ping, Microsoft. They're very good at it. And to be honest, we are using open standards here. One of the nice things about that is you have a security research academic community who looks at these protocols, sometimes finds flaws that we didn't think of. It's one of the advantages of this stuff. These people are very good about disclosing that information in a way that lets the vendors update their products and the big sites to deal with this stuff before it becomes more generally known. If you roll this stuff on your own, you are unlikely to hear about that stuff before the hacker who uses the technique to get into your site. So standards are great, but standards plus vendors who implement them well, even better. Okay, so I'm going to jump over now to some slides to explain a little bit more detail what actually happened here. Okay. So, I wanted to first explain what the end user goal is, but you guys are a sophisticated group, so I want to then explain technology under the hood, how this works. And if you want to actually learn more about this, more than we have time to talk about today, there is a website you can go to, accountchooser.com. This is not, like I said, a formally launched service yet, but we will be in the future providing the information for website operators on how to add this small JavaScript to their site so they can layer this system on, as well as point them to vendors in the OpenID Foundation who can help them get out of the password business itself. But a reasonable question is, okay, where the heck did this list of accounts come from? And to explain that, let me use as the example my wife, who also sometimes gets on my computer. Let's say that she also heard from me about this one online game, and she decided that she wanted to try it out. Well, my whole family is traveling with me in London this week for tourism, so we're sharing a computer. So she got on that computer and wanted to try out the site. Well, there's no picture for her. So what would she do? Well, there's this option down here to sign into another account. And this is an escape hatch, but to be honest, we're going to try to avoid as much as possible users ever needing to see it. But going through it will explain it technically what happens pretty well. So when she goes and clicks that button, sign into another account, she will see a page that is completely under the control of the website she is visiting. This is just one particular website page. That page, for example, might be for a website who doesn't do anything with federated login, only as people log in with email address and password, the traditional stuff. If so, fine. That's what the site would show. It would show their traditional, existing, unmodified login sign-up page, and she would go ahead and sign in. Other websites might choose to support one identity provider or a couple of identity providers. Here I'm doing the whole gamut. She's a Yahoo Mail user, so if she came here, she just quickly picked the Yahoo Mail button. But in this case, it's a website who supports a whole range of identity providers, as well as the option for a user to just type their email address, and then the website can attempt to do as much discovery as possible. Maybe figure out if it's the email address of a corporation that they have a SAML IDP that's registered to use, or maybe find their webmail provider dynamically as an OpenID Connect identity provider. A lot of different techniques there. Another thing the website can do is look at the IP address of the user and language. Maybe it's a user coming in from a Russian IP address with Russian language preferences. Well, then showing an AOL mail button probably isn't going to help a lot of people. Maybe show a mail.ru button, which is a popular webmail provider there. But anyways, once the user gets this page, either click a button or type an email address. And if they have chosen the option of, say an identity provider, like my wife clicking Yahoo, the user would be asked to log in, enter your traditional email address and password. However, what's interesting is the next step. After the user had logged into this site with an account they never used before on this computer, this is the screen that they would see. And this is what I want to walk through. What is happening here is the user is consenting to add her account to the list of accounts that are already on this computer that are frequently used here. And she could choose not to. She could choose to skip this or turn this off completely. And if you look up at the very top, and probably a little bit hard to see, right now this is running on the www.accountuser.biz. That's sort of our staging point before formally launching this on accountuser.com. So she is actually, at this point, being asked, do you consent to add this account, yes or no? If she clicks yes, then she would get logged into the site. But let's go back here for a moment and look at this. What this, and we refer to it as a service, is a central domain run and operated by the OpenID Foundation, that if you go to it, and you can go to accountuser.biz on your own computers right now, if you look at the HTML, and the raw HTML, it's about a one-page, very simple, static HTML file. There's no server-side infrastructure here that the OpenID Foundation is running, no logging infrastructure, so no tracking of your accounts, no tracking of what websites you visit. Just a simple HTML file that then causes your browser to load a JavaScript application that uses HTML5 storage to keep this list of accounts in your computer. So in fact, a user at any time can just type www.accountuser.biz on their browser. Immediately that application would pop up, show them the list of accounts. They can delete accounts if they want. They can turn off the whole darn thing if they want. But it's completely in the user's control, and it is basically a dynamic browser extension or an embedded feature in the browser. So we've talked about identity in the browser for years with techniques like InfoCard, Browser ID, etc. But we've come to the conclusion that with the most modern versions of JavaScript and HTML5, you can get identity in the browser without having to wait for a new version of the browser. You just need to leverage HTML5 applications. So this service, accountuser.com, is one that any website on the internet can choose to redirect a user to with a suggestion of an account they might want to add. But if and only if the user consents to add it, will it actually be included in their list of entries. So I sort of mentioned before that the flow where the user had to add an account to that computer and then pick from this long list of what we refer to as NASCAR buttons, that we want to try to avoid that. And one of the ways it can be avoided is that when a user logs into their email provider or their corporation or their social network, that provider could choose, as just a matter of policy, to redirect the user to this point so that they could add that account. So imagine for those of you who are enterprise IT guys, when your employees log in, you could redirect them into this page, their account should be shown up. If they then ever end up at an enterprise SaaS vendor that you use, who uses the central account user, they'd immediately see their corporate picture there. All they have to do is click it and be logged in, and not have to, as was talked about earlier today, require the enterprise SaaS vendor to completely change their URL infrastructure just to deal with the discovery problem. So that's the first feature of this account user service. The second one and sort of showing before, is the page on which the user selects an account. So just like I mentioned a moment ago, any website can redirect the user here with the suggestion of an account to add. Similarly, any website can redirect the user here with a request for the user to pick an account. Now, in this mode, I'm actually doing sort of the most advanced thing. Again, if you look at the URL up at the top, the URL isn't, expensesv205, it is the accountchooser.com service itself. And what that page is doing is showing the account list, and it has also gotten a pointer to the website's marketing information to run through some HTML sanitization to make sure there's no insecure code there. And it's just mixing the two on the site, showing as a single page to the user. What account do you want to use with this website? A very easy decision for the user. Some websites, I'll use a slightly different UI. Some websites don't want to put their sign-in flow immediately on their home page, like a YouTube, for example. You can do a lot with YouTube without logging in, so they just have a sign-in link, and when you click it, you probably just see a screen listing the accounts with no marketing information. But in any case, that is up to the website. And so, like I say, any website can redirect the user here, ask for a list of accounts to be chosen. There's some advanced options to ask for the list to be filtered based on what identity providers you support or other elements like that. Now, when a user picks an account from here, there is no cryptography going on. There's no fancy protocol. There's nothing specific to OpenID, OpenID Connect, SAML. All that we do is we take these 3 pieces of information shown in this account entry and just pass them as strings to the website as claims, to use our terminology. And it is then up to that website to decide what the heck to do with those 3 claims. Honestly, not that different from a user typing the email address in your email address and password field before they click, return. So let's say a website does this, gets these 3 pieces of information, and it's a website that only lets people log in with email addresses and passwords. Fine, in that case, the website will ask the user for the password of that account if it's already registered, or as I was mentioning before, if it wasn't registered, drop them into a sign-up flow. So that's one option. Another website might actually be able to use an identity provider to try to verify the user's address. What protocol they use, completely up to them. WSFed, SAML, OpenID, OpenID Connect, something proprietary with Twitter, Facebook, etc. Up to them. The account chooser is designed to be protocol agnostic on purpose. And so the website can attempt to verify the user's email address, that was the claim here. And, for example, maybe the website was previously just logging people with passwords, and now it's getting to the point where it's trying to sort of upgrade users to use identity providers and get out of that password management business, so they stop being an attack point for the hackers. As long as that claim can be verified and the source is considered trustworthy to assert that email address, then boom, it can let the user to the account. Now, I will make a point, especially in enterprise audience, that you need to do more than just verify cryptographically the asserted email address from the IDP. You also need to decide whether to trust that identity provider to assert it. So, for example, I would generally suggest that no one should trust the Google identity provider to assert a Microsoft.com address. Sure, Microsoft.com runs a very secure Active Directory IDP with SAML. If you want to get a verified Microsoft address, go to them and get it. But you might be able to find out, from Google that, hey, we once ever, did a traditional email verification, point. That gives you a strong signal that the user's coming in probably is the owner of an existing account there. But you're probably going to want to do some additional identity verification, maybe by sending them directly to Microsoft's IDP, maybe by asking for their traditional password there. So that's the option if the user already has an account. Now another mode is the user came to your website, picked an account, and your website said, I've never seen that email address before. But you're still able to go to the identity provider to get verification of it. Now, here's an interesting thing. We were showing in the previous sessions these consent pages where users see this gargantuan list of information that a website is asking for from them. But a lot of websites, the only piece of information they're trying to get from an identity provider is verification of the email address, like the very smallest, most basic thing. And one of the things we've consistently noticed in user testing is if a user goes to a page that looks like this one, and they say click a Gmail account, and they've never visited that site before, technically they would generally then see a Gmail consent page that says, hey user, do you consent to sharing the name Eric Sachs and email address ericSachs@gmail.com to the website expensesv2005? And it's really funny because consistently in the usability studies, people said, hey, I found a bug in your system. It asked me the same thing twice. Right? That's actually what they think. They're like, I just gave consent. Why the hell are you asking me this again? And we found that to be consistently true. So one of the things that it is technically possible to do with the account chooser is that if a user has never visited the site before, but if they've consented to share their email address with the site can go to the identity provider, and the identity provider can actually communicate with the account user and say, wait, did the user with this email address already say that they want that email address to go to that site? Oh, they did? Okay, well, fine. I will provide that piece of verified information back and nothing else. So if it's Google, I'll verify the user's Gmail address and won't give the site access to the user's address, book, photos, calendar, but I'll just do the basic email verification. So now all of a sudden the site has a claim for the user's name and photo and a verified email address for them. For many websites, that's enough to immediately create an account for the user. If they want to try to get more information from the user, like, age, gender, etc., certainly nothing stopping them from popping up a forum and asking that. And if they want to try to get access to more of the user's information, like address, book, calendar, photos, and some other service, fine, go ahead and start an OAuth flow to do that. But we've at least done the very lightweight login element of this without bringing in some of the other technical complexities and permission complexities into the equation. But the end goal is to get websites to the point where they deploy this, because our end goal is to try to convince users that they can actually reasonably expect that if they go to any new website on the internet and they've never been there before, that they will be able to sign in or sign up very easily. Honestly, at Google, what's our incentive for this? Google does well when the internet does well. Why did we invest in things like Chrome and Speedy Protocol? We want the internet to work faster, more stably, more secure for users, lower friction. Right now, sign in and sign up is a very significant source of friction on the internet. We believe the internet as a whole would be improved if that friction was removed, but at the same time, we got better account security. On top of that, then we can do a lot of things with user permissioning for exchanging more data, but at least let's remove this known friction and this known security problem. And we want to do that not just on the desktop web, but in particular on the mobile web, where we see people's willingness to go through sign-up flows is just about zero. They just don't do their own things. As someone was mentioning, there are some websites they don't even attempt to do a sign-up on our mobile device. Wait until you get to a PC, sign up there, and then come back to our mobile device. But a lot of our design in the account chooser is to make sure it works well on the mobile device. And funny enough, we've actually found it works in many ways better there than it does on the desktop. Funny enough, on the desktop, you only need part of the page to show this account chooser list. So your marketing guys go wild with lots of other crap on the rest of the page. On the mobile devices, I feel sorry for the marketing guys. I don't know what they do. But they're so constrained that all you can offer is functionality. Like, a user comes to a site for the first time on their mobile device, what account do you want to use? Click it, and you're in. That's all there is to it. Another one that has been talked about today is mobile apps, like your iPhone apps, your Android apps, etc. These are another one where it is traditionally very painful to log into them. It's even more painful to log into the mobile app. The mobile app is connecting to a website that doesn't have your password, because it's a SAML RP or OpenID RP. The user flows for that today is the best practice is for the mobile app to pop up a web browser that usually has an empty cookie jar. You have to try to do discovery of your IDP again, which is ugly, and then you have to type your username and password and maybe your multi-factor authentication. It gets the job done, but it's not very pleasant. So what we've been working on with Apple and Android and other mobile vendors is the ability for that installed app to download it the first time, and when you click, I want to sign in, it pops up your main web browser, where chances are you're already logged into some accounts previously, therefore you already have entries in your account chooser. You click the one you want to use, quickly behind the scenes, goes to that data provider, verifies who you are, comes back to the website says, oh, you're eric.sachs@gmail.com. Now all of a sudden I can give an OAuth token, to talk to my server back to the app. What it means for the average user, the process of signing into an app on their mobile phone is click sign in, see a list of pictures, click the account they want to use, and they're done. It doesn't require a lot of proprietary integration with, for example, like the Android account manager some of you all played with. We're doing this based on the open standards we have already, whether it is SAML, OpenID Connect, or other technologies. So I mentioned this website, accountchooser.com, that you can go to today if you want to actually learn more about this and drill into it. In particular, there's a web page for website owners. And if you click that, there's some videos you can watch, some more information about it. But also down at the bottom is a link to the actual working group for the site. And if you go there, you can see instructions about all the demos that I just showed. If you have a Facebook account, Twitter account, you can try them out yourself. And if you are interested, you could even join the working group mailing list and give us feedback and ideas on how to enhance this, for your scenarios. The goal right now of the working group here is to formally launch this accountchooser.com service in the Q2 timeframe. We functionally have all the features that we want. We have it, all translated, work properly. The thing is, we're a bunch of backstabbing competitors who don't trust each other. So if this is a service run by the OpenID Foundation, we want to make sure that when it's launched, no one has the back doors to the SSL certificate and DNS stuff. So we just have to do it in a way where we equally distrust each other, or some equivalent of that. So we were just agreeing last week on the process we use for that. So that's our goal in the Q2 timeframe. While you're waiting, for us to do that, there is something else that you can do, which is all our demonstrations here were about what we call a central account chooser, meaning in the user's browsers, there's one central list of the accounts they most frequently use. Because usually it's a very small list, 4 to 6 accounts for the average person or even on a shared computer. But another option is for your website in its own cookie to keep a list of the accounts that you've seen the user use on your website on that computer. A common example is banks. Most banks require people to log in with a username, not an email address. People have a harder time remembering that. So most of these banks, when you first type in your username, there's a little remember me option. And if you do, well, they have a very lightweight account chooser that remembers one account in a cookie, in the user's browser. My wife happens to run a small business that uses the same bank that we use personally, and it drives us nuts because we keep on having to log each other in and out. I wish they had an account chooser or two. And fortunately, there are already 2 products available in the market today, one from Jan Rain of Jan Rain Login Helper, another one from Google called the Google Identity Toolkit, which is sort of a lighter weight offering but Jan Rain did provide to help websites deploy a local account chooser on that site, and if they want to also become a relying party to get out of the password business. And the user experience is pretty much the same. You go to a site, click the sign in button, see a list of the accounts that you previously used on the site, pick the one that you want to use, and you're done. However, there's somewhat more interesting thing that might convince you guys of some of the value proposition of this, which is if you go to that same site, there's an option to opt into using an account chooser on Google. And this has been available since last July. What I mean by this is we at Google have already deployed an account chooser in our own login system. Last July, we turned it on for about 15,000 employees, all on the same day, no warning, no explanation, just to see how many people would complain, what questions we got, and we got none. A somewhat sophisticated audience, but to be honest, we've got a lot of marketing and sales and HR people who are more sophisticated than the average person. Instead, what we got was a lot of positive feedback. We thought it was great. And then we publicly have offered the ability since last July for people to opt in to using their account chooser experience on Google. And we wanted to get feedback to see if there were edge cases where this didn't work. Now, one of our main driving reasons for deploying this on Google was this feature of Google Apps. So how many people here are part of companies who use our Google Apps email outsourcing service? A couple, okay, actually quite a few out there. And some of you may be running a SAML IDP that controls your employees or frequently student logins to Google Apps. So that means Google doesn't have a password for your users. And so let's say a student or an employee of one of these companies comes to Gmail and tries to log in, which they frequently do. What they end up doing is there's an email place there, they type their email address, and there's a field underneath that asks for password. Guess what they type there? And then they hit return. And if they type in a password, they're one of these SAML-enabled domains, we pop up the "You are an idiot" button. It literally says, please, in the future, don't log in by typing your email address and password, the things we ask for. Instead, leave the password field blank, because that's so obvious, right? And then if you click that, we'll look up your IDP and we will redirect you there. And that is what we call the "You are an idiot" button, because that's what people tell us that they feel like when they get that message. So a lot of our research in the account chooser is how does Google do a better job at being a relying party to thousands of IDPs? Because we are already today in that situation. How do we avoid the make the user feel like an idiot type problem? Google is also, today, you can configure your account. If you are a Yahoo, Hotmail, and AOL user, you can use that account to log into Google without having a password either. We just haven't broadly launched it for exactly the same "you are an idiot" problem. So a lot of our work on the account chooser was to see, okay, do we have a user experience here that doesn't hurt our Gmail users and helps these other users? That was actually our goal. Like we said, as long as it doesn't hurt our 80% users who log in with the password and it helps the other 20%, fine, we'll launch it. What instead happened is our 80% users loved it. Loved it to the point that we can actually see the statistical improvements in sign-in, sign-up rates to our services. And so we made the decision a few months ago that we were going to focus on launching account chooser on Google, not to help us with federation scenarios, not to use the central account chooser, just because of the value we saw in a local account chooser for people logging in with the password. And we are, there's sort of down in the bottom, probably hard to see there in the back, there's sort of a yellow promo. In the next few weeks, a percentage of people will start seeing a promotion in the bottom of the Google login box saying, hey, would you like to turn on this new account chooser interface? And if they do, they can immediately start using it. So, historically we've let people manually opt in if they've heard about this at conferences. We have quite a few people who've done. But now we want to start getting a high percentage of our login traffic to go through this flow and use it, like I said, for people who are logging in with passwords, and then over time optimize it for people who are doing federated login. The other thing we'll be doing in Q2 is for a growing percentage of those users, we will be sending them to the central account chooser to basically cause an entry for their Google account to end up there. Maybe that Google account is a Gmail account, maybe it is their corporate email account. In any case, we want to help bootstrap the value of this central account chooser so that when users go to other websites who use it, the user experience there is just as simple as clicking their picture and they will be logged in. So we're going to continue to report to the community, how this works for us. But one of the things, when I started out, I showed Yahoo login pages where Yahoo had buttons for Google and Facebook. To be honest, we found that as a real turning point for adoption in our community. Up to that point, there were so many questions about security, stability, reliability, etc. When people saw that Yahoo was doing this with their two biggest competitors, they basically have decided, well, either Yahoo are idiots, or maybe there's something to this and it's reasonably secure and reliable. Our goal here is to get to the same point. Either we and all the people at Google and our login team are idiots, and by the way, we run a more reliable service than our web search team does, so I don't think we are, or something here actually works well that other people can follow. So that is our goal. And as I mentioned, we want to provide this as sort of a 2 steps for websites, saying, hey, if you go to accountchooser.com, there's this very simple JavaScript you can drop in your sign-in or sign-up page, get an account chooser on your site, and immediately start seeing some of the same benefits from it that Google has seen ourselves, with our users who log in with password. But if you're ready to do more, we really want you to do more and get out of the password management business, then please go and talk with one of these vendors like Microsoft, Jane, Divya, Thing, etc. Now, that is the short version. I always like to have the short version and the long version. So that is the short version of the guidance we're going to give to websites. This link, which, God, that is hard to read, goo.gl/big-R8pmp, or just do a search for OAuth space Google on Google search and find a link to it. This is a booklet that we provided as guidance to website operators who are interested in deploying an account chooser on their site, but trying to figure out how it fits in with a lot of other challenges they have to deal with. So one of the things our identity team has been doing over the last few years is basically managing a site where we published as much ongoing research as we could about what worked, what didn't work, links to other companies' presentations like Facebook, Twitter, Microsoft, etc. Basically trying to document as many best practices as we could. I'll be honest, it's about 80% bad practices. All the things that we've tried, or usually tried multiple times, that did not work, mostly for usability reasons. And then the other 20% that did. That is roughly about 1,000 pages if you print it all out. I don't think you want to go and read that. So we've been able to condense it down to about 30 pages of information about best practices for running a website. Starting with the basic stuff like dealing with the account chooser where your site has a password, but then starting to deal with some of the more advanced stuff like, oh, you want to do identity providers? Well, dude, before you even touch identity providers, you better figure out what you're doing with your Android and iPhone apps where you can break the damn thing. So start with that first. Then some information about how to experiment with email identity providers, which actually is an easier place to start than social networking providers, etc., as well as information then about consuming and exposing APIs. And then there are also some sections in the book that basically fit with the next 2 topics that we're going to talk about trust framework, certification of IDPs, and stronger authentication. So like I said, we have the short version and the long version. But our goal at Google is to convince probably quite a few of you in this room, get rid of the passwords you're storing on behalf of users, and for all of you in this room, hopefully eliminating the need for you to reuse passwords on a lot of websites. And so I hope some of you guys will go ahead and on your own websites, play around with these techniques, run percentage experiments, and give us feedback on how it goes. For those of you who do run websites, one of the things to keep in mind that we found to be incredibly powerful about this is traditionally most websites you have a single login box. And you can't run percentage experiments with the login box because people think they're phished. You can't have like 10% of your login boxes look one way and 90% another because someone's going to go from work to home and see a different login experiment. That just doesn't fly. One of the things we found with the account user is there is a flow a user goes through to add an account to the page. Or there is a flow that happens after they click an account in an account user. Those are areas that you can personalize. So you can do something like, for example, only offer federated login to 1% of your users after they click an entry in the account user. Or if the user does go to your site and say, oh, I want to add an account, you can experiment with what identity providers are there. And so one of our traditional problems with login systems was how do you run percentage experiments? This is a way where you can. You can start dipping your toe into the water with this stuff and see how it works. Great, well, so hopefully this information is helpful to you. You'll go and take a look at the site, read more. Please send me your feedback. I'll stay around for questions for. Actually, we're pretty far ahead of time, so I'm going to stay around for questions for a bit. Let me point out logistically, and where's Philip? Is Philip traveling around? Way in the back. Okay. Do you want to come forward, Philip? So if I remember correctly, Philip, at 3 o'clock we have to be out of this room, and they're going to be cutting it in half. I don't know what half we get. Do you know which half we get? That half. All right. So some of you, when you went online to do registration, they noticed we had some sort of large amount of tickets available just for the, the large amount of tickets was available the whole day, a subset of tickets just available for the morning. To be honest, I think if we shoved everybody together and a few people decide to leave after this, we could probably just about fit people in. But if we come back afterwards and we try to fit in, and it's up for seats and fire violations, we're going to try to ask people under the honor system, if you've got a ticket that was only valid for the second part of the session, to leave, sorry. But we are recording all of this, actually presenting it online even if you want to just go out, look into it with your laptop and watch. The videos will be made available as well as the slides. So, when we get kicked out at 3, we have some snacks outside. We'll hang around from 3 to 3:30. The presenters will be there. You can talk with us. And then at 3:30, we will bring people back in. Did I get all that right?
You did.
Okay, cool. So we have about 20 minutes now, and especially because we're going to lose some people, can I actually ask all of the presenters to come up? And I will certainly answer questions about the account user, but for those of you we might lose after 3:30, I also wanted to offer a chance for you to ask questions to, for example, Patrick and let's see, Mike Jones, Vidya. I think Patrick Hardy we probably lost, but you guys can come up. But great. Are there any questions I can answer for people about the account user?
Do you want to click your slide?
Yes, I can.
Does the account chooser work with multiple Google Apps domain login?
Yes. So I don't know how many of y'all are aware of this, but one of the features, it's a relatively advanced feature that Google has, is the ability to be logged into more than one Google account at a time. This is most frequently for people who have, say, a personal Gmail account, and then they have a corporate Google Mail account because their corporation is hosting them. One of the big complaints people is like, oh my God, every time at lunch I got to log out of one and log into the other to check what's going on. For about a year, we had the ability for people to be simultaneously logged into both, and just individual tabs in your browser were connected to one account or another, which is nice. You can actually see, hey, that tab has 300 messages. Let me shift over there. We didn't broadly advertise that feature. In fact, for those of you who turn it on, you may notice you have to click 4 scary checkboxes with lots of legal wording. That was primarily because only a subset of our services supported this feature. We found if users, could be multiple logged into Gmail, but then they went to YouTube and it didn't work out, it confused them. Sometimes some embarrassing things happen. Fortunately, now we have enough people who are actually, we have enough of our services that have adopted it that we made the feature much more discoverable. I think between November and last week, 50 million more accounts turned on the feature. It's become much more popular. But too bad is it sort of exacerbates the problem of going to a website and clicking the Google button if you're logged into 2 or more accounts at Google. So with the account chooser, you can actually go to a website, and if you click your corporate account there, as opposed to your personal one, and you're logged into both at Google, we're passing through enough hints in the system that you just get logged into the correct account.
It gets confused sometimes.
Yes, and that's why we didn't formally start announcing it and pushing it until just in recently the past few weeks. We're finally happening. And then,
any plans to use non-email address referencing scheme?
So if you play around with the account chooser, if you go into the details ones, in fact, let me see if I there's nothing specific about the account chooser to email address, so this is sort of a testing system where you can go in and shove in entries into the central account chooser. Email address is one of 4 possible fields that can be in an account entry. So for example, let's say we kept on talking about banks who tend to have people log in with usernames, not email addresses. A bank might choose to implement a local account chooser where the only entries are usernames. Or take Twitter as another example, who their identity provider doesn't pass out email addresses, but many people know their Twitter handles. So you can use that as well. Now, we generally, our user experience testing has found that usernames work better in a local account chooser, not the central account chooser. But that's just a user experience thing so far that we found, not a technical limitation.
I suppose I'm thinking the site that's asking for my identity, redirecting back to a central or local chooser saying which one do you want to use, it's asking the chooser the attributes it wants to list. So if it says email address, I have no option but give my own address. So if I don't want to do that, then I can't play.
Yeah, and actually, there's always sort of a fallback. Like one of the ones on a completely new computer, there's no entries in your account chooser. So if it bounces there, it's just going to actually, and it doesn't even require redirects. It's just going to automatically go back to the website's traditional sign-in, sign-up page and follow it back there. In addition, if a user chooses to turn the feature off in their browser or as a very old browser, it'll just continue to fall back to today's experience. So we're not making it any worse than today. We're mostly making it better, not solving our problem. I went way over here.
Does this work okay with content management environments like Joomla, WordPress, and so on?
Correct. Actually, one of the things that's nice to happen is there are people who are already building plugins for a couple of those, like Google and WordPress in particular, to make it very easy for those to drop in one of these account choosers on their system. And then there are some other vendors like Patrick was mentioning, Hangouts at Hangouts is involved with OpenID Foundation, has started work on a plugin for Google that we use an account chooser one, but then should also hook in to do the federated login and say ping spot. So you can turn on one module and then later turn on the other one. And one of the reasons we're doing this up with standards is to push for the creation of more such plugins.
Is it just using session storage or the actual HTML5 browsers?
We are relying currently on pure HTML5 storage. Our reason for doing that is to technically be able to show that we've avoided ever sending information back to the servers that would have the static HTML5. I mean, you can go and look at the JavaScript code. If you go to the working group site, you can look at the JavaScript code yourself and see how the data is passed and forth. And we've done that as openly as we can so people can be confident. The OpenID Foundation with our, Google, Microsoft, and Yahoo are not colluding all together to try to track everywhere you can. But not really.
Is the account chooser working group also working on discovery?
Not technically. I will be honest. It has generally been hard to incent the community to work on the discovery problem when we didn't have a UX that worked well with discovery. Like when it was an NASCAR button, look back to the reason for discovery. Google has had a somewhat proprietary scheme for discovery for a while. We host 1 million businesses and schools email systems. We run identity providers for all of them. So there is a way to pull Google and ask, hey Google, do you host this company's email? Now, we tried to go to those companies whose email we host and schools and say, can you just put this one little file on your domain that says you delegate to Google, your stuff? We did an aggressive campaign, plus quite a lot of money to try to get this website to do it. We got 13. So we can design perfect protocols for discovery, and adoption of them may still be difficult. So we've actually also had discussions with, say, like the Office 365 team and some of the other big corporate email host providers on it may be that an element of discovery is checking with some of the large big email providers, hey, do you host this person's email? There's a trust decision that has to be made there. So we may want certification of big email providers to make sure that they are answering those questions honestly and reasonably, and then websites can choose to decide whether to support that or not. But as an example, Google has about 600 enterprise app vendors who do that type of discovery to Google, so we can help millions of their corporate customers, employees log in without an app. But I guess like Matt Jones or Matt and Mike and John Bradley can tell you more about the current proposals for doing discovery of OpenID Connect. They do exist technically, but we just have adoption.
It's very simple.
Yeah. That's what I mean. Right?
So there is a large overlap between the two work groups, and I'm trying to get like Andreas Solberg from South and others involved in the account chooser work group so that it will work with multiple protocols so that research and education people can use it. Because I think that's to the benefit of all.
One of the other things we hear is that separate requirements for the central account users for websites tell the central account user, I only support the IPs who have been in certification trust framework 62. Only show those. And that's something you feel free to do as long as there's some dynamic way for the JavaScript running your browser to go look up at the web page somewhere and find the currently certified IDPs.
And I'll make another comment about that. That's where user interface requires discovery protocols for the best user interface. So there's definitely a linkage between user interface, discovery, and trust frameworks. We have to solve the whole to get as good as it should be.
Does it work with JavaScript or not?
No, right now, we specifically tailor for older browsers. To be honest, we can technically do it with just redirects and cookies. The problem is that in that case, information would hit a OpenID Foundation server. We can tell the world that we don't store it, we don't track it, but there's a trust and belief in there. So we believe it is better at this point to start by not supporting that mode. If we get enough usage and adoption of it, then what we've considered is having such a mode, but having a little warning down for the user of, hey, you're using this, but we really suggest you upgrade to IE 9 or Chrome or something to get better security practices. We haven't implemented that as a feature yet. If we want to start with that.
I was just thinking of government access.
Exactly. Hey, it's an open work group. Other people want to help and contribute code. More than happy to take it. But like I said, right now we're prioritizing. We don't want to fight off too much.
One of the added complexities is the different levels of identity assurance. I'm able to use an E to access government sites or banking sites.
Right.
Did I hear you say that you would enable filtering out of accounts that didn't provide?
Right, and actually, we're going to have a longer session about that. The last session today, I'm going to talk a little bit about those topics. But already this idea of a website could tell the central account user, hey, I only support IDPs in Trust Framework 13. Well, Trust Framework 13 could choose to only support IDPs at a certain level. Now, doing it at basically the individual user level as opposed to IDP level would require the central account user to know more about the user. And we're not sure that's appropriate at this point. So we're still trying to find the right balance there. So theoretically, if an IDP supports some LOA for users and some LOA too, maybe they click an account, go to that site, and the site would say, I'm sorry, I know who you are, but before I can let you do more stuff, you have to go through this additional hoop. But that seems to be what most websites want to do. They don't want to just keep these out. They want to recognize how far they've gotten in the process. A year or two, here's how to get
Would be quite frustrating if I had to keep guessing which my accounts will live.
Right. And it may be that we do decide there's a reasonable privacy method. Like most users don't seem to care about the privacy whether I was logged in with a password from this device versus with an OTP. We're probably willing for that to be a piece of metadata and account user entry. But I think as a community we need to decide that that's the thing because to what we're talking about before, we're not going to be able to educate our teenage kids about that. So we have to be comfortable with that information being in there, even though we realize that our teenage kids don't understand. We have to decide to be that right.
Yeah, with the new data privacy things that are coming in particular with cookies,
right,
and the storage of cookies, I noticed obviously in a lot of the use cases that we looked at, you just sort of click on identity, and you click the now button, doesn't seem to be much provision for those new users.
Right, and one of the problems, and again, it goes back to user experience. One of the user experience problems we have with cookies is you can turn off all the cookies in your browser. I mean, who can anymore? Or you can go in and control which websites use what browsers, and you can manually, delete browsers. Probably only a couple people in this room could feel educated enough to do that. That's just not a very, friendly user experience for managing a cookie. So that's why, here, and if I go back to it directly, the idea being that if a user really wants to manage this stuff, we make it much more discoverable for them. Go to accountuser.biz, see a list of the account entries you have there. Oh, sorry, I picked an empty one. Oh yeah, right here. See a list of the entries you have, delete individual entries, or if you went to the learn more, you could just turn it off completely. So instead of dropping a user into just the generic cookie management user interface of their browser to try to manage this stuff, we're trying to make it a much more, honestly, usable user experience for managing the equivalent of cookies. Now all this information is stored in HTML5 storage. You can go to your browser and purge that stuff as well. We just don't think people, will understand how to do that. So actually, based on our meeting with privacy groups, this is the type of thing they'd like to see more websites and applications do, as opposed to force people to hunt and peck through browser settings.
What about the advising that from the site to the user? Do you realise really what you're doing when you're linking this account or logging into this account?
Correct. And that's what obviously a website has to decide they even want to become a relying party as well, and that people reasonably understand that. And this is where, if you go and read like that thousands of pages of research, that's where we put a ton of time into trying to figure out what do people understand and what don't they. Do they reasonably understand giving their email address and password to a site today? Yes, they've come to be trained. Do they realize if they give their password to a site and the site leaks it, that someone's going to break into their Gmail account, delete all their data, and convince their friends to send money? No, right? So, if they now, go to this site and site is over here, and on the left is name, email address, and photo, do they realize, what they're giving? There, the primary one that we find is starting to come up is if you give a site your email address, there's a lot of public information discoverable from your email address, especially with Facebook and Twitter. Do people, recognize all that? No, I don't think they do. But to be honest, if you go to a website and sign up with an email address and password, you already have the same problem. So we don't think, we are making that one particularly worse. And so we've invested a lot of time with the usability studies to figure that out. What we've actually found is there's a pretty big, call it intellectual jump between making a consent decision to provide your email address, name, and photo to a site. Like anything more, especially with a data set like address book, calendars, photos, contacts, that is a much harder, decision for users to make and to understand. Yes, Facebook has, trained a lot of people on how to do that, but, even they have been part of these usability studies to find there's a big line between the three items we've shown here and just about anything more. Like one of the requests that we frequently get is the ability for these account user entries to have the data element of the user claiming to be over a certain age bracket, which many websites, ask for. Technically, it would be very easy to add that here and even stick it in the UI. In our usability testing, we found that you can actually measure, the time it takes people to make a decision. Adding that element significantly increases the time it takes people to make that decision. So that's why we've drawn the line at just these three for right now. Well, I made all these guys stand up. Don't people have questions for these guys too? Like, we can beat up into Patrick some more and have him defend Facebook. But are there any other questions that we could try to answer for the group before we take our break?
Apologies, I'll ask one more. Do we see, as we go in this trend, either from your point of view, which might be more of a technical point of view, or whether we're looking at it more from a societal, behavioral point of view, now that we've talked about rules and tools, or tools and rules, we've probably got it the wrong way around, that we need to have a certification regime that goes beyond the rules to make sure that all parties in this trust chain are playing by those rules.
Right. And public is only a subset of the audience knows about this. Let me give a little bit of history there, and Don can jump in if I get some of this wrong. There is already one such example framework. So 3 years ago, the U.S. government approached a number of popular consumer identifiers and said they wanted to enable American citizens to log into some government websites, but they wanted exactly that type of certification framework. And we said, fine, why don't you write up a list of things that you would like to have? When they wrote up the list, we're like, dudes, on basically all of those, it's an easy check. We don't need to do anything. We're fine. It ended up in that case where the primary challenge was that there was a document written, I think, in like 1998 about password quality mechanisms. And one of the requirements was that if there were 5 failed attempts on a login, the user should be locked out until they went in person to a help desk. And we're like, Google is not going to do that. So instead, and actually there's a public article we wrote in this that I can send you if you want, where we instead describe all the different mechanisms we use to protect against, password cracking and attack, techniques, including trying to prevent a lot of other websites to get out of password business. And after analyzing that, taking the conclusion, yes, that's actually more sophisticated than what they would suggest.
So teasing out on the points there, the Kantar initiative, one of the
another
certifications
example
specified on the OMB letter. In that, one is looking at a trust framework meta model, which looks at comparisons between trust frameworks so that you can give that kind of analysis. Now, there is work happening in the cyber operations realm to look at what good metrics look like. But it's not in this realm. That's not where the cyber operations metrics look at. So my question really comes back to at some point there's going to be a certification regime which is acting in a common good rather than a US-centric,
exactly,
etc. And is it not in the interests of providers in this new market to have somebody as that third-party trust audit, point of reference, whatever, so that the risk side of this equation can be managed?
So I was looking around to see if there are any of my buddies from the U.S. FICA didn't stick, so I can make fun of them a little bit. To be honest, when the U.S. government did approach the OpenID Foundation about this, we actually very specifically said, we cannot work with you as just the U.S. regime. We are already international companies. That is just not acceptable. We created this sister organization, the OpenID Foundation, the OIX, that some of you might dealt with, and said, this is a regime that would sort of sit between OpenID Foundation as one piece of a puzzle, and they would in turn deal with different government, and not just government, other groups, e-commerce groups, legal insurance groups, banks, etc., who want to define certification frameworks. And we are big believers of the guys sitting next to you that we need international standards for this stuff, not purely domestic. It's certainly fine for specific groups to define their specific requirements, which might include the U.S. government. But as the OpenID Foundation, and our job is on international standards, not purely domestic standards. We do believe that there's a lot of technical work we can do here. I think Tony's more of an expert on this than most people in the room, on how to actually have technical summaries of these certification frameworks, so it's possible to sort of at a machine level detect, oh, Google is certified, by at 13 and 17 and 24, but not in group 11, type of thing. And we are trying to work forward on the standards to make that possible over time. To be honest, right now, there aren't a lot of these certification frameworks, and we aren't seeing a lot of relying parties use them, because what we're finding is, was pointed out by January and Fuga, the adoption of this stuff by websites is already significantly happening without the need for certification frameworks. By the way, let me point out an interesting statistic when we talk about strong authentication that's continued to be a surprise to us. Generally speaking, when a website becomes a relying party is a Facebook, Google, Yahoo, AOL, one of the big companies, one of the things they strangely notice is that the fraud rate on those accounts is about an order of magnitude less than their other accounts. And we saw this like the first 3 times, and we just thought it was an aberration, like user selection or something like that. But we see it time and time and time again. And we've eventually come to realize that actually what is going on is Yahoo, Google, and Facebook are not only pretty darn good at protecting accounts, they're really good at detecting when these hackers have hijacked an account and just sent out those I've been mugged in Madrid mails. They lock out the account completely until the real owner can come back in. Well, that means if a website is a relying party to Google or Facebook, and there's an account there that a hijacker took over, as soon as it's locked out, it can no longer be used to get back in the relying party. Whereas if the website was just logging in with email address and password, and it's a password that's linked to the hijacker has that door immediately in. So we actually find that like 2 years ago, there was more demand for certification frameworks for websites to be comfortable in things like the security and the reliability and the trust mechanics. What we are actually finding now is websites are making the decision to move forward without those because they're finding the security value proposition is already there and they no longer have the concerns about the protocol and the reliability. I don't think that will get us to the end goal, to the goal line. I think it's going to get us very, very far along those lines. And we all know governments have the highest bar to jump over to play in this space. And I think if we have more and more of that adoption and comfort level in the consumer space, it'll make it a lot easier for us to help citizens engage with the government. Done?
Well done.
Well done. Like I said, I try to be one step away from this stuff. Actually, where's my boss at introduction? He'll be speaking soon, and he's taken over more of that type of discussion from me. Great, so we have 2 more minutes before we're kicked out. Any last questions, especially for all these guys that did stand up? No? Okay, cool. So like I said, we're going to go out, drinks, we have half an hour, and then we're going to see how many people can fit back in. I'm hoping everybody decides to stay, and if not, honor system will kick some people out. Thank you very much for your time. Yes.
I like a whole bunch.
Sorry, Angus.
Do that shipping my own domain, and I use a different email account for every single domain.
Exactly. We call it per RPID, techie term.
So at no point the account is ever going to work.
Actually, it already
Account chooser at my domain.
Right.
And I decide that one's down there on the assurance level.
Right.
I'm okay to share that one. It's okay.
So technically, we actually have it working, and we've been user experience testing to figure out how to make it work. So Google already supports the ability for websites, online parties, to ask for a per RPID instead of using email. So technically, supported out to not many people do it, but it's possible. And so what we do here is, if a user goes to such a website, the website shows central account user, and the users they pick their Gmail account. The central account user loads a little iframe to Google and says, hey, can you tell me what this user's per RPID is over here? I don't need a cryptographic signature, it's just a claim. And along with the user's, actually that's right, the only piece of information that is popped up, not even the photo, to the site is, okay, the user's identifier is here, and this we claim is the user's RP identifier. Do a OpenID check ID style flow, and if it's a match, then we get back a verification search. So if I'm technically to do it, the problem is if a user does go to a website like the NHS, what user experience should we show them for the user to realize I'm using that account at Google or self-operated, but the website's going to get a directed identifier? What was it when we tested that? What was the only thing they understood? Oh, no, that's right. I was thinking something else. We have never successfully been able to get users to describe back to us what a per RPID is. Right? So I think we could enable individual users to do it. I think websites could do it under the hood without people realizing it, and that's some privacy advantages. But we have just not found the user experience where people understand this identity is going to site A and site B, but site A and B can't correlate to who I am. And the scenario we've tried to use to test this is people doing clinical trial matching. We have people who, like, you go to hospital A, you get your test results, and then you want to go and sign up for clinical trial matching over here based on those test results, but you don't want to know who you are. And we've been trying to figure out, could people understand that technically it's possible for us to avoid the correlation. And I actually started the Google Health Project as well. We've literally been doing UX testing of that since 2005. So that's 7 years, and we have not found a way where users understand. So that's been frustrating. Microsoft's help team has also done the same participating.
Well, I'm not actually sure there's an answer to some of this.
I'm not sure, after 7 years, I'm not sure there is either. Oh, we're really getting kicked out.
Hey, Eric, I just wanted to introduce myself.
Yes.
While you're packing up. I'm Brian Spector.
Oh, okay.
I know Andy Nash.
He's going around somewhere.
I don't know if he's here or not.
He is. He's going to be speaking next.
Oh, well, we're gonna get kicked out. We didn't get into the second.
Okay. Well, I think you may find there's.
So we're gonna join the OIX as an executive member.
Okay.
Young company, in shortage, and we're coming out with a two-factor authentication solution that uses HTTP.
Enterprises or consumers?
For everybody.
Okay.